Hello and welcome to another Confessions podcast, an audio array of terrible tales from the discerning, if sinful, Radio 2 listeners. This week's concise collection includes a ghostly gag goof, a nighttime knocking nuisance, a subtle swigging swindle, and some digging device deception. It's not bad. I'd give that 7 out of 10. Who will you forgive? It's entirely down to you. Here come the tales. Here's tonight's confession. We welcome the venerable Dedicote.
Thank you, thank you.
Is that how you'd like to be?
I think so, yes. Vulnerable, venerable.
Okay. Yeah. That'll do. Kathleen it is who sends in tonight's confession. Thank you, Kathleen. Father Simon and the Forgiving Few. My story dates back to the late 70s when I was 10 years old. On this particular school day, I'd popped home for lunch and therefore missed lunch play. I arrived in class after lunch and sat at my desk alongside my 3 best friends. They were giggling hysterically, a sure sign that something exceptionally exciting was afoot. I couldn't wait to hear. Through shrieks of laughter, my friends told me about the lunch play that I had just missed. Apparently, they had absolute proof of the ghost in the girls' toilet.
Wow.
How about that? Thank you, venerable Dedicote.
Just adding a little something, you know.
At this point, some description is necessary. The village school buildings were over 100 years old. The toilets were located outside. They were dark, cold and drafty cubicles in a brick building. The actual toilets were those old-fashioned ones with the cisterns stuck high up on a wall and a long, long chain. It transpired that my friends had performed a séance in the toilet block by standing just outside the cubicles, linking little fingers and chanting. At the critical moment when they chanted, toilet ghost, we like you the very most, make yourself known, one of the chains moved.
Oh, boy.
The ghost was communicating through the medium of the toilet.
Of course it was.
I was a little jealous of the fun that they'd had without me, and instead of joining in, I rolled my eyes and stated the obvious. It was a draught of wind that made the chain wobble, duh. I just added that bit. Quick as a flash, one of my... Because they didn't say duh in the 1970s, did they? Quick as a flash, one of my friends said, fine, you can't join us this afternoon playtime, as there's only room for 3 without making the séance circle all squishy. As I opened my mouth to protest, I stopped, because a plan had entered my head. Oh. When the afternoon play bell was rung, I raced outside to the toilet block. I chose the middle cubicle and positioned myself out of sight behind the door. In my hand, I held the end of the long chain that reached up to the cistern high up on the wall. It's important to note at this point that, in order to be behind the door, I was on the wrong side of the toilet, so the chain was at an angle passing in front of the toilet to my hand. My friends arrived and were pathetically nervous. They giggled apprehensively and ran out again. They crept back in and linked fingers. A slight breeze made the door move and they shrieked and ran out again. This was going to be easy, even if it might take some time. Eventually, after much nervous creeping in and giggling and shrieking, my friends managed to form a circle, link little fingers, and began the séance. The critical moment when they chanted, toilet ghost, we like you the very most, make yourself known. I pulled the chain with all my might. What happened next will live with me forever. With my first pull, the toilet duck disinfectant product, which was sitting on the top, unbeknownst to me, spilt over the cubicle. Ectoplasm, shouted one of my friends. No disinfectant, I thought. Anyway, then I pulled again. To my horror, the angle at which I pulled the chain and the ferocity caused the heavy porcelain lid of the cistern to be launched into the air. It flew over the toilet bowl and crashed onto the concrete. To say I was shaken would be an understatement. I was a quivering wreck. Blubbering, I staggered over the cistern lid, which was lying at my feet, broken in two, and out of the block to try and find my friends. It took quite a while. Eventually I discovered them in the library, shaking near the teacher's desk. They were also in a state of shock and, quite frankly, looked as if they'd just seen a ghost. Then they saw me. They went through the whole story. They told most of the year about the toilet ghost. Within a few minutes it had become a school legend. I, of course, then told them the complete truth. Under normal circumstances, they would have probably channeled their nervous energy into killing me, and rightly so. However, seeing me so distressed, they were very forgiving. I spluttered and blubbered what had happened, and they cautiously followed me back to the toilet in order to assess the damage. A small crowd was already there, looking at each other with meaningful eyes and knowing nods. They were scared but thrilled, as the school had a ghost. What I need forgiveness for, well,
Yes.
Not from my friends, but I do ask forgiveness from my bewildered teachers. I confess that it was me who'd broken the toilet, and 2 teachers came to survey the damage. They showed no anger, after all I had nearly been killed by a flying cistern lid. Instead, they were bewildered, astonished and flabbergasted. How on earth could a 10-year-old slight girl have pulled the chain hard enough to launch the weighty cistern lid? Maybe there was a ghost after all, I heard a teacher say. So the toilets had to be shut down, thus leading to a lot of told-you-so type stories. The teachers repeatedly asked me, how did you flush? And I repeatedly looked innocent and said, I just flushed in the normal way. But this wasn't the case. And I told them the truth. They would have seen that the angle at which I'd pulled the chain caused a lever effect, which I'm sure you've worked out. This, combined with the ferocity of the pull, was the simple explanation for a child being able to perform such damage. Most children, of course, chose to believe the toilet ghost story and that the school was covering up their haunted toilet. The toilets were, of course, not dangerous places where cistern lids could easily be uplifted and fly onto unsuspecting children. However, the temporary toilet in a tent and with a hastily dug hole underneath was nowhere near enough to cope with the school's requirements, and so the school shut.
Early days at Heathrow, that
for a day. So there's the tale. So it started off as a ghost story, a flying cistern and some ectoplasm, and then they had to shut the toilets, and then they had to shut the school. So all chaos caused by Kathleen, Sister Rebecca.
I love the way there were 10-year-old girls performing seances. I mean, that is quite young, isn't it, for a seance?
I don't know. What's the correct age? Is it,
I think
have to be 18?
At least a teenager, I would have thought.
Do you think?
Yeah, and then not only that, but after the chain had wobbled a bit, they went back for a second seance, you know. And then the other funny thing was the way the teachers, rather than just thinking the girl was strong enough to pull the chain and break the cistern, they said, no, it must be a ghost.
Probably. It's an
a ghost.
easier thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Kathleen, it was a funny joke you played on your friends, and you were just lucky that no one was hurt. So, yeah, you're forgiven.
The Venerable Dedicote.
Absolutely forgiven. There's nothing to forgive because she fessed up straight away.
She did.
She told everything to everybody, and still they didn't believe her. So, nothing to forgive.
Are there any ghosts in Broadcasting House, as far as you know?
No, there used to be in the Langham Hotel opposite, didn't there? That was when James Alexander Gordon threw his leg at the ghost. He of having only one leg anyway, right. And threw the other one at the ghost.
But by their very nature, that would just pass through the ghost. Did the ghost run away?
No, I think he did in the end. But anyway, as best he could. He's a personal friend, do you mind? But and legend. But, yeah, so there used to be a ghost over there. We used to sleep over there, you see, when we were on shift. You'd read up to the midnight news, go to sleep for 6 hours and get up and read the 6. So, yeah.
Oh, that's what the effect was. I thought it was a comedy plank noise.
Yeah.
What do you have, Brother Matthew? What do you think?
I love the thing I love about the seance thing is where they say, make yourself known. And instead of the ghost coming out and going, here I am, I'm the ghost of the toilet, it's going, no, what I want, far more subtle, I'm going to flush the cistern. Oh, could be a ghost, or maybe it's the flushing of the cistern. I also love the fact that everyone thought it was a cover-up. Yes, it's Watergate involving the toilet. Brilliant. I'm going to forgive, because, as we've all said, she's already confessed to everyone.
She did, and she confessed to the teachers as well as her friends.
So,
it was just the crazy. Once the system, you can imagine that once the school has been told there's a ghost in the toilet, you want to believe there's a ghost in the toilet.
Of course you do.
You don't want to believe it's 10-year-old Kathleen who just pulled the system thing a little and smashed the system. That's what you say when you're at school, isn't it? That's the.
What?
Smash the system.
Smash the system.
Oh, system.
Yes.
Right, yeah, well
Play
done.
on words, Matt.
Brilliant.
Play on words.
Outstanding.
Well, it's all been very sensible in the studio. Then the Venerable Dedicote joined us in the collective again, and all standards disappeared. Anyway, I have learnt that the Costa Rican colon is pronounced how, Matt?
I'm going to say it's pronounced colon because it's the Spanish version of Christopher Columbus. Right. There you go.
Good, very good. That's got nothing to do with the confession. Just clear up the pronunciation.
Clearly, yeah.
Here's tonight's tale. It comes from Alex. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Drive Time Confession. Send yours to confessions@bbc.co.uk. Dear Father Simon, the ever-forgiving collective. My tale relates to one evening spent in Kingston upon Thames in the early noughties, when I was in my very early 20s. Roland, one of my best mates, went to the renowned University of Kingston.
Yep.
Heard of that?
No.
No.
Everywhere's got a university.
And me and my other friends, uninitiated to student lifestyle, used to make fairly regular trips from Birmingham to Kingston to stay with him and indulge in some, shall we say, student hijinks. Presumably that means academic Hard work, but maybe not. This particular evening, we found ourselves in one of Kingston's more reputable nightclubs, drinking and dancing and generally enjoying ourselves. I had recently found myself single for the first time in years, and despite most of my friends being partnered up, I was enjoying my newfound status. I found myself chatting to a nice girl on the dance floor, and as the night wore on, things were going very well. As the music drew to a close, she invited me back to a house party that was taking place at her friend's house. Being of the adventurous type and having consumed enough cheap alcohol for this to be a tempting offer, I accepted. Roland and the lads made their excuses to return to his flat. It was evident I'd be heading home alone. What followed on arrival at this unknown destination I would most certainly not describe as a house party, more a collection of girls sat around in the living room, drinking, reading poetry and giggling. All that is, apart from one girl, the girl whose house we were in, who was becoming, for some reason, increasingly upset at my presence. She took a rather stern disliking to me, and after a short while, through no fault of her own that I can recall, things came to a head with her screaming at her friend that I should leave. Not wanting to be the cause of this upset and fervour, I simply requested a local taxi number and left. It wasn't until the door slammed shut, with the screeching sound of aggressiveness behind me, that it dawned on me I had absolutely no idea where I was. Despite fairly regular trips to Kingston, I had little or no knowledge of the area outside the centre, and these were the days, of course, before GPS on smartphones. And the time was approaching 4 a.m. The street was deserted, so I began wandering down the road looking for a sign that I could use as a reference point to order a taxi. I found such a sign and phoned a helpful operator who assured me they'd be there soon. They just needed a house number. I squinted across the road in the darkness and gave him the number of the house directly opposite, thinking I should just sit and wait. Well, I can't really explain my actions that followed. Maybe too much cider, possibly an ever-growing sense of paranoia from being on a strange street with nowhere to go at 4 a.m. But after about 5 minutes, I noticed a large car creeping slowly down the far side of the road. I was so relieved to see my taxi, I ran into the road, waving my arms like crazy.
No. Oh, no.
The driver looked horrified. He braked suddenly and then drove off at high speed, actually burning rubber as he went. Goodness knows what he was looking for. Anyway, so the next car that came along I treated with suspicion. It too was crawling along, apparently checking the street out, house by house. Initially I guessed that it could be my taxi, but as the rate of the creeping did not increase, images from 90s slasher films started swirling in my head, and rather ashamedly I decided to hide behind the bush that I'd perched myself next to. I stayed crouched and filled with suspense until the car crept right up to where I was standing, or crouching. I then heard a loud knocking, followed shortly by a door opening, then followed by a rather irate-sounding man saying, "What the hell do you think? What do you think? I haven't ordered a taxi. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, you idiot." "No, I don't want your card." He was told precisely what he could do with his taxi service. At this point, it all clicked into place. I jumped from behind my bush to the sight of a puzzled man standing in his doorway in his dressing gown and an equally puzzled taxi driver. "Taxi for me," I shouted.
I think you're fine.
Drive on, my good man," I chirped. Yep. And I hopped into the car, closely followed by the taxi driver, and off we went. I do think I might actually have said, "Home, James." So, Father Simon, I don't seek forgiveness from the girl whose house I was ejected from. To this day, I still don't know what it was that caused her to be so upset about me. But I do seek forgiveness from several others. The first driver, whoever he was, and whatever he was looking for. The real taxi driver, for misjudging him as some crazed slasher crawling the streets of suburban Kingston. Most of all, I seek forgiveness from the poor man and possibly his wider family, who received a rude 4 a.m. wake-up call from a taxi driver expecting to pick up from his house, and was faced with a rather merry, if uncertain, young bloke prancing about from under a bush. Unfortunately, I don't remember the street in question. I thank him for unwittingly allowing me to use his house as a proxy taxi ordering point in my hour of need. As you'd expect, I didn't return the text of the girl that I met the next night. Anyway, it's an interesting tale from... Who'd have thought this stuff is going on at 4 a.m. in Kingston-upon-Thames, of all places? Sister Rebecca.
Well, it's fairly clear to me that the reason the owner of the house was so cross with him is that he'd walked in on a girly evening. They were reading poetry to each other, and they didn't want some random bloke sitting there with them.
Do you think that's
so I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
Have you ever been to one of those
girly evenings?
Girly
yeah,
poetry evenings?
Not the poetry bit, no, but I often have girly evenings when it's just girls, you know, gossiping and that kind of thing. And you don't want men around, really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, especially not men you don't know. Anyway,
I think that's sexist.
Is it? Right. Anyway, I think he should have ordered the taxi from the girl's house. I think that was a bit short-sighted of him, rather than leaving, realising he didn't know where he was, and then choosing a random house number. So for that reason alone, Alex, you're not forgiven.
Fair enough, thank you very much indeed. The Venerable Dedicoat.
Well, I'm normally very forgiving, as you know, on these occasions, but I'm in one of those moods today. It's been that sort of a day. The first driver... Shut up.
Why, what's that?
The first...
Why has it been...
Well, apart from being, in the same office as...
Mad.
Certain individuals. The first driver, no. We know what he was up to anyway, so he doesn't deserve any sort of apology.
Do we?
We know what his game was. The real taxi driver...
I reckon it was someone from BBC Transport who was lost.
Well, yes, it's quite likely that, isn't it? Wouldn't have found the house anyway. The real taxi driver...
I'm 5 minutes away.
Just round the corner.
The real taxi driver, he's about to pay him anyway, so I wouldn't actually bother with that either. But the homeowner, he should have explained, really. He should have struggled to explain, so I don't forgive him for that. He should have said, I'm terribly sorry, but... I seem to have found my way into one of those dodgy areas of Kingston.
There isn't such a thing as a dodgy area of Kingston. Come on, we all know. So not forgiven?
On balance, no.
Oh, OK.
Being harsh today.
Rather Matthew.
I think we've all learnt a lesson here, haven't we? About if one is ever invited back by a young lady in Kingston to a house party, to first clarify what house party she means. Does it mean a house party, or does it mean let's all sit around drinking prosecco and reading Coleridge, and then inexplicably someone's going to get mad because you're a man? So I'm going to say not forgiven. No, I'm going to say forgiven, because I'm going to take his side, because I'm a bit confused.
You've been on the Prosecco yourself.
So, what are we doing here? We're talking to Seth. That's what we're doing, because tonight's confession comes from Seth. Cheat Child of Wine is the title that we're giving this.
Very
We worked very hard. I say we worked very hard. It was Joe who worked very hard on this. Thank you.
Well done, Joe.
It takes him hours. He comes in at 8 in the morning and just spends hours trying to think of a title. That's where we ended up with, and very good it is too. Dear Simon and the Merciful Collective, I write to confess a terrible act of fraud and treachery against my industry peers. Happened back in 2004. I was at the time the trading director of a very large pharmaceutical wholesaler based in the Midlands. My job often required me to negotiate large, complicated contracts, which had to be discussed and agreed with very expensive lawyers. These lawyers worked from very luxurious offices in London and Manchester. They were always dressed in the latest designer clothes and had the latest mobile phone and boasted the best suntans and so on. You get the picture. My boss loved interacting with these lawyers, and it was with much disappointment on his part that he asked me to deputise for him at a corporate wine tasting event that our lawyers had arranged. The prospect left me completely cold, and with much reluctance I agreed to deputise for him, and on the appointed evening set off to our lawyers' swanky offices in Manchester. Now, it had been some time since I'd visited the centre of Manchester on an evening, and I hadn't bargained on the traffic. It was a nightmare, and I arrived at the lawyers about 20 minutes late, all of a fluster. Arriving at reception, I was ushered quickly into the main conference room, where the assembled illustrious guests were waiting. The room was set up in classroom style. A small area was left free at the front for the host, and tables and chairs were arranged in rows. All of the chairs were taken by senior executives, who were impatiently wondering which idiot, i.e. me, was the reason that they hadn't yet been able to get stuck in to the array of wonderful wines. I was quickly shown a seat at the back on a table by myself. The wine expert had 2 helpers who filled and refilled our glasses with a selection of wines whilst we were briefed about the wine in question. One of our helpers brought the wine from behind a screen in a back corner of the room just near where I sat. As each bottle was removed from its box, a sleeve was placed over the bottle to prevent anyone in the room identifying the bottle. The wine was then taken to the front, where it was poured into our glasses, and we were asked to fill in a questionnaire about where it came from, what grape variety, which chateau, and which year. I mean, this is pretty precise stuff. All very difficult questions unless you're a wine expert, which most of the executives in the room appeared to be. Well, I like wine, Father Simon, but I am a long way from being an expert. However, I know what I like. I can tell white from red, I can usually spot a rosé, and I can tell if it's fizzy or not. He is indeed a wine expert, I think.
Basically up with my level, that.
Yes.
Yeah.
As the first wine was brought to the front, I had discovered that if I leant back on my chair as I savoured the beautiful flavour of the wine in question, I could just see the carton from which the wine had been taken. I could therefore see the country and the variety and the chateau. As I was on a table by myself, no one else had my view. I did think for, I don't know, a millisecond, that I should not look and enter the spirit of the evening, competing with the other invited guests. And then I looked around at the bunch of middle-aged, self-serving businessmen and thought how surprised my boss would be if I won the competition. Well, no contest, really. As each wine was brought, I leant back on my chair. I looked wise and stroked my imaginary beard, looked across at the boxes and completed my questionnaire with the appropriate answers. Malbec from Argentina, Bordeaux from France, Pinot Noir from Australia, and so on. At the end of the competition, our completed questionnaires were gathered in for marking. We were all shown into an adjacent room for canapes and more wine. After about half an hour, the sound of gentle chatter was interrupted by our host. Ladies and gentlemen, we have completed the judging and have a clear wine expert in our midst, as you will see. The results of our wine tasting evening is as follows. In third place with 12 points, then he named the lucky individual who stepped forward to accept his prize bottle of wine. Second place with 15 points, again, the lucky winner stepped up to collect his 2 bottles of wine. However, in first place, our wine expert with the highest score we have ever received, 28 out of 30, and then he called my name. I was stunned. I couldn't quite understand how I got 2 answers wrong. Anyway, judging by the gasps of amazement in the room, I judged it wasn't the time to challenge the marking. I duly scuttled up and collected my case of fine champagne worth thousands and bid my hosts and other guests a hasty good night, leaving quickly before anyone rumbled me. So it was with great delight the following morning I was able to recount to my amazed CEO how I had won the wine tasting competition. As a thank you, I gave him a bottle from my very expensive case of very lovely fine champagne. So it is with much trepidation I ask for forgiveness, not from my boss, who got a bottle of champagne for nothing, not from these self-serving guests who were totally amazed that someone like me clearly knew how much more about wine than they did, and not from the wine experts who I think suspected something was amiss but couldn't quite prove it. I asked forgiveness from my contact in the law firm who invited my boss and then me. He was ribbed no end by his colleagues for inviting a clear ringer to the event, and I'm not sure he's quite ever lived it down. 28 out of 30. I mean, I'm not sure anyone really in their right mind could probably tell the chateau and the year. I would have thought, what would you think?
I don't know, maybe real expert.
Maybe in the higher echelons of society, maybe this would be standard. But most people, I would imagine, would be with the, yes, I can spot a rosé, or if it's got bubbles. But maybe you're a finer stock.
What confuses me about this story is, what kind of wine tasting evening actually tests you on your knowledge? I thought they were about teaching you about wines. Maybe because they were lawyers, they sort of wanted a wine tasting evening.
It was
like
a
this.
quiz, really, wasn't
Yeah, I know,
it?
but it's a bit of a bizarre one, isn't it? It's not exactly pleasurable. I just would find it incredibly stressful. But I think, his victory was quite sweet because it was victory over lawyers. But I think he was also quite lucky that he wasn't asked to pronounce on his favourite wine or, give some kind of expertise when he was presented.
That's why I think he scuttled pretty
pretty exactly. But I think it was all is fair when you're up against lawyers. No, I'm only joking. So, Seth, you're completely forgiven.
What's wrong with lawyers?
No, nothing at all. Nothing. I've got loads of friends who are lawyers. At least one.
Yeah.
Too late now. I think lawyer confessions are well overdue. We could do a whole week of
yes.
lawyer-based and wine-based confessions. Anyway, Brother Matthew now.
I should emphasise this point that I have no experience of this. However, if you're gonna cheat, make sure you get a couple of answers wrong. That's the skill. Don't get them all right, just get a few of them wrong, and then nobody's going to suspect. And that is why Seth is going to get my forgiveness, because I think deliberately Seth got those 2 answers wrong. And so no one was going to suspect that he knew that. How do you know the chateau and the year? From the taste?
You read it off the label.
Exactly.
So what was the quiz that you cheated in?
I've never...
You have?
Never cheated.
Absolutely have.
I've obviously never cheated. But
your
if I were to
your
cheat...
Spanish GCSE?
And it is a skill, make sure you get a couple wrong. Well done, Seth.
For some reason, the Venerable Dedicote is passing notes and messages to Sister Rebecca. Well, I'll have that note.
No, you don't want to know.
I'll have
You
that
don't
note.
want to know what that's about.
Sister Rebecca has wisdom that I need.
What were you passing advice? Or were you making derogatory comments?
I don't think we should talk about
It was
this.
advice. It was
No.
advice. Very
Anyway.
good advice. Very good advice.
Anyway, the confessions music is on. I'll get a photograph and I'll put it on Facebook.
No, you won't.
Won't I? Okay. There's a nice souvenir, a shareable souvenir of our confession, which we have put there. But this is from Steve, who says, Dear Father Simon and the Admirable Assembly, before I set the scene and inform you of my naughty deed, can I just say that I think Matt will especially like this, as it involves a blonde lady.
Is that my cue? Oh, I say.
No, I was just leaving a pause.
Leslie Phillips. Okay.
From here on in, I will refer to her affectionately as Devon Dumpling. It is simply a term of endearment, in case you're wondering. My story dates back to 2004, when I had won a major landscaping contract to install waterfalls, ponds and streams in Plymouth. As you can imagine, I was really excited about this venture and set out to install all the features in a totally professional manner, as per usual. The second day on site was a beautiful sunny day. There were hundreds of people wandering around, passing through the site where we were working to get the historical Barbican over the Swing Bridge. Loads of people stopped to ask us what we were doing, so we explained to them what we were installing, and there were lots of oohs and ahs and when will it be finished and that kind of thing. We carried on with our work, and then towards the end of the day, when the crowds had thinned out considerably, I heard a female voice behind me. "Excuse me," she said, and I turned round, and there stood the Devon Dumpling. "Can I help you?" I replied. "Well, I hope so," she said. "Is that tool you're using easy to use?" This was a question from Devon Dumpling. I looked at the tool in my hand and then back at Devon Dumpling, and then glanced over Devon Dumpling's head to her partner in the coach park. He was grinning and giving me the thumbs up, but I had no idea why. "Do you mean this?" I said, waving the tool towards her. "Yes, you see I have a problem with moles in my garden as well," says Devon Dumpling. Well, I had to think, standing on my feet, and in a split second decided to go for it. You see, the tool I had in my hand, and which I had been using, was in fact a CAT scan. For any of the collective or listeners who don't know what it is, it's used for detecting live electrical cables, and certainly not for detecting moles or anything else that was alive. It has a yellow pointy thing and a box connected to it. This is a technical description.
Yes.
I glanced across into the coach park again, whilst Devon Dumpling was still staring intently at my mole detector, and by this time her partner was laughing so much I thought he was going to collapse. "Well, they're quite easy to use, really," I replied. "Would you like me to show you?" "Yes, please, that would be very helpful," said Devon Dumpling. So I moved the fencing aside to allow her into the site and proceeded to explain how the mole detector worked. "If a mole is present," I said, "a small electrical charge registers just here," and I pointed to the dial. "You see, there's nothing registering. That means there are no moles. The yellow painted OK signs on the ground," I explained. "That means that there are no moles in the area, so we can dig it up, and that's where the pond is going to go." "Oh, I see," says Devon Dumpling. "What are the yellow painted crosses for?" "Well," I said, that line of crosses indicates that there is a mole run, and we'll have to put a mole trap in place to catch them." "What are you going to do with the moles? You're not going to harm them, are you?" says Devon Dumpling, somewhat concerned. "No," I say, "we're going to take them out to Dartmoor, to a mole sanctuary. There they'll be perfectly safe, and they live happily in mole farmsteads with where there are amenities and everything, and they live happily there until sometimes they're at least 20 years old, in mole years, obviously." Oh. Well, it's a lovely kind of rural image, I think. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for giving me this advice. I'll call my husband over and I'll let him know. "What's your name?" Well, at this point, I have to tell you, I didn't think I could speak anymore. You know that feeling in your stomach when hysteria is about to kick in? Well, this was it. I somehow managed to blurt out that I was called Steve. "Well, thank you, Steve," she says, and then gestures for her husband to come across from the coach park. "Dave's been really helpful about the problem we have with our moles, darling, and has explained what we're going to do." "Oh," she adds, "does it detect any other animals?" "No," I say, "just moles. It's the sugar in their coats that does it. It kind of sparks." Well, I was really winging it by this point. Yeah. So she continues, "You see that yellow paint? Well, that means it's okay and there are no moles there. We'll take one of these machines. Thank you very much indeed." And she left. I was left sitting on the mole holes crying with laughter. So forgiveness, not from the moles who thought they might be captured and taken out to Dartmoor and put in farmsteads with amenities where they could live to their 20 mole years at least, but forgiveness from the Devon Dumpling, who probably spent many hours wondering why her moles were not registering on her rather special detector with the pointy thing in a box. Forgiveness, please, from your honourable collective. Let's see what we get. If they'd stopped passing notes, they might have heard just a few words and facts from tonight's tale. Did you want to go first, Venerable?
Well, I was just questioning why Rebecca always goes first. I don't know. It's ladies first. Is it?
It's just
it's fine. After you.
But we've not got nothing to say after that.
This is like
we've got
freeform
nothing
jazz.
to say.
Okay, fine.
Brilliant.
First of all,
Rebecca, you're going last.
Can I just... You're going last.
Yeah, it's fine.
First of all, can I establish whether a device was actually sold?
Well, she said, yes, by implication, she said she'd take one.
I mean, because then we're verging on the fraudulent. On the fraudulent. Obviously.
Get with the groove.
But But on the principle that the partner was goading him on,
Yes.
I do indeed forgive Stephen on this occasion.
Thank you.
Is that what you wanted? Am
I like
now
the way
in the
you
group?
gave us a sanctimonious nod at the end there. So now, Brother Matt, then,
Wow,
before...
this is crazy.
Revolution.
Wow. My dad used to have one of these CAT scan things, and we used it because you'd need to know when you were banging a nail into a wall.
Very important.
As whether you were going to have obviously a live connection on the other side.
Did you try it to
Yeah.
detect for
It was
wildlife?
great fun, and I wish I thought of something like this to sort of impress friends with and say this can detect something on you. Wouldn't that be great?
It's the
but-
sugar in the coating
Yes,
of a
apparently.
mole.
I get the feeling that Devon Dumpling knew all of this and was just having him on.
Do you think?
I think so. And but I didn't realise she actually bought it afterwards, which seems a little extreme to want to buy. I'm going to buy that because I've got. Well, you know you've got moles, so you could do that. And they go, oh yes, I've got moles. Well, you knew that before. Why are you buying this CAT scan? So I am not going to forgive.
I
don't
can't
know
understand why this thing can detect electric cables but not moles.
Because electric cables have electric currents through
Okay,
them.
I got it
Moles
now.
don't.
All right. Anyway, this
Usually.
reminds me of a story. The whole thing is based on the premise that Devon Dumpling was really gullible to believe that these moles were taken to this Devon farmstead. But you know, my dad, actually, this is a true story.
Did he run the farmstead?
No, he didn't run the farmstead,
Wow.
but he puts humane traps in our attic for the mice, and then he catches them, and then he walks under the tunnel. He lives in South London, and he walks under the tunnel and releases them in North London. So they won't
So it's
come back.
Down to him. It's your dad. That's why we get mice.
Outrageous.
Well, it's very nice
Disgraceful.
to the mice, isn't it?
Well, why should
Doesn't
we have
kill
to...
them.
What?
Why don't the mice come back through the tunnel?
Well, they may do. They may do.
And the
I don't know.
No,
Who
because the
knows?
mice always say, I'm not crossing the river
No.
this time of night.
Anyway, I think there was no
Has
serious
your
harm
father
done.
not got anything better to do with his
He's
life?
retired. He likes mice. Anyway,
just
he doesn't
off
mind
the
them in the
tunnel,
attic.
Is that what
back in an
awaits us?
hour.
That awaits us when we retire, a life of trapping wildlife and then releasing them in
Yeah,
horrible...
Possibly the same mice.
Anyway, I forgive you, Steve.
They were this week's confessions. Who did you forgive? You need to let us know. And send in your own confession. We know you have so many things. You sit there regularly listening to the podcast, chortling at everyone else's misdemeanours. What about your own, huh? Confessions at bbc.co.uk, or you can go via the website. More next week.
I saw